If you just do it, it'll turn out okay. And we are back for our Roman history with the bead
Yup.
and our semi sponsor, Junebug Films.
Cool. Yeah.
All right, so last time on Rome, they deposed the last king,
Yep.
correct?
They deposed him because his son not nice, and he wasn't that nice either. So, but we're gonna look at what happened after that and how true it really is as well.
All right.
So,
So we are officially in the time of the Republic now.
yep.
The Galactic Republic?
No, the Roman Republic. Uh, and we're gonna go as long as Rome is still only a little itty bitty power. That's because I'm ending it where Rome starts having to fight other powers in the Mediterranean. Starting with
So at this point, they're not. Sorry. So at this point, they're not even all of the boot yet.
no, but they come to become the power of the boot by the end of this. So, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Let's see what we have in store.
So the founding myth of the Republic. Um, we talked about it a little bit in the last episode, but I just want to go back over it. Um, this noblewoman named Lucretia was assaulted by the son of the king, Tarquinius Superbus. And after this, four noblemen, all uh, aristocrats and from the family of the king, um, decide to rebel after Lucretia robloxes herself. Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who's pictured here, he's the nephew of the king, um, and he'll be the first consul with Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, who is not only the king's cousin but also Lucretia's husband. They lead the revolt. Tarquin wasn't in the city. He was, according to the myth, he was off fighting a war. So he's forced to run back to the city, but the city closes the gates to him, so he's forced to look elsewhere. Um, he constantly goes to different Etruscan cities to find help. Um, at one point, there's a battle. Uh, Brutus discovers his two sons are helping to plot the restoration of the monarchy. He executes them, and then he goes off to this battle called Silvia Arcia, um, and he dies there.
Hmm.
And Tarquin is defeated. Uh, this is important because we do know that this battle happened. I'm pretty sure, and there is part of it. It people trying to figure out what actually happened have to fit it into the narrative because of this. Um, the next city that Tarquin goes to ask for help is Clusium, and their king is Lars Porsena. He attacks Rome. It's looking a little dicey for Rome there for a little bit. But then some dude named Horatius Cocles defends a bridge all on his own until it's demolished. Kind of like the Viking berserker at Stamford Bridge or stuff like that. Actions like this convince Porsenna to retreat because he can't defeat the heroism of the Republic's youth. And Tarquin's forced to go find a different um, benefactor, and he goes to the Latin League, the Latins that are around Rome in Latium, and he asks for their help. And in the last ditch effort for the return of the monarchy, the Latins and Tarquin are defeated at Lake Regillus, and Tarquin is forced into exile for good and dies in Cumae. But how much of this is true? Probably not all of it at all. Uh, we know Lars Porsena probably invaded stuff like that, but we'll get into that to the next slide.
All right, so now we'll think here. I actually didn't know his name. But do you know? I actually learned this guy's name in the Percy Jackson series.
Brutus?
No, Tarkin.
Oh, Tarquin? Yeah.
He was one of the people in that series.
I didn't know
He's
that.
Tooth.
I didn't.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty good. He in the Trial of Apollo miniseries, but yeah, like I had not even though he's not really alive still 2000 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are a couple of historical approaches to how historians interpret this story. A lot of them, the first one is the semi-traditionalist approach. This accepts the broad strokes of the Roman tradition as true. There was this revolution that happens. First off, you're going to have to get away with this 510 BCE thing. That was probably only included so that it could be 1 year older than Athenian democracy, as a way of Romans saying, no, we did it first, kind of thing. Because the Romans are very chauvinistic people. They want to be the first one to do something, even though they constantly adopt the customs of their neighbors and then just repurpose it. They like saying, no, we did it first. Typical chauvinistic behavior. But sometime around 500 BCE, the semi-traditionalists believe a domestic crisis sparked a revolution and Rome becomes a republic. But there were similar revolutions occurring throughout Etruria and Latium at the time, and Lars Porsena, who was the most powerful monarch in Etruria at the time, decided that he needed to fix the situation and bring monarchy back. So there's evidence that Lars Porsena probably actually took Rome, and that isn't brought up, of course, in the myth, but probably took Rome. But as he was moving further south to defeat other revolutionaries, he's defeated at Silvia Arcia. So that's the semi-traditionalist approach. Essentially, most of this is true, but the figures probably aren't, and Lars Porsena probably took over the city. The other one, because we know Porsena takes the city, it is that Lars Porsena actually took Rome from Tarquin and put in place the Republic, bringing in allies from the royal lineage and putting them in power instead, founding the Republic. But Porsena is, and this is a project of Porsena trying to take over Latium, which is the area around Rome, to the south of Etruria, because it's a fertile area, it's rich, all of the trade routes go through it, and but Porsena is forced to flee because of Silvia Arcia, and but the Romans fight Tarquin off and don't let him return. There is another theory that essentially the Republic comes from a constitutional monarchy sort of thing, and the monarchy might have continued on for a lot longer than we think it did, and the consuls arose out of the king would appoint two horsemen to be his second in command, essentially, second and third in command, and they think that the king gradually lost more and more power, and these two officials gained more and more power, and later became the consuls, and that the monarchy survived longer, and it's actually a fluid move away from monarchy to republicanism.
Yeah. So the two consuls weren't themselves like a monarch.
They held imperium. They could control. They could propose laws. They could lead armies. But they only ruled for a year, and there were two of them, and they were elected, of course, because republic. There were a bunch of different positions that controlled other things. You had the censor, who controlled the census and also built roads, aqueducts, stuff like that. Aediles would hold games and festivals, kind of thing. So that's what historians have to say on what actually might have happened. And there's, I think the semi-traditionalist approach is the most supported one. But these are the three different hypotheses for how Rome actually became a republic. So the major thing that dominates the earliest stages of the republic is the conflict of the orders. You have two different classes: the patricians, the people who are descended from the first senators, and the plebeians, who were just they're usually the army stuff. Yeah, the monarchy are a type of ruler. I don't quite understand the question. Can you rephrase that? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good thing that we don't have class warfare nowadays.
Yeah. It's not really class. There were a lot of the patricians were the only ones who could become consuls, aediles, censors, so they had a lot of power over what happened. And if you were elected to a magistracy, you were given membership in the Senate, which the Senate is the major deciding body. Yeah, you can, as a consul, you can propose laws. That doesn't mean that those laws are going to actually pass through the yeah. That doesn't actually mean your law is going to pass. And there's a lot of problems with that in the latest period of the Republic, kind of.
So, well, the consuls themselves weren't really senators, were they? They were just more like military leaders.
You would probably be a member of the Senate, but I don't think that you you were a member of the Senate probably. But I don't think you had a right to be in the vote probably. Once you got once you finished your magistracy, you'd go to the Senate kind of thing. But if you were a consul, you probably had been a senator for a little bit at least, um, because there were some conditions to you becoming consul.
At least in this early, at least in the earlier Republic period.
There were. It was actually far more difficult to become consul later on. Um, you had to go through a lot more hoops because this dude named Sola uh, tried to formalize how you did it because he was tired of all this rabble rousing from the proletariat. But we'll get there when we get there. Um, so the plebeians made up the bulk of the army, and at this time, the army is not a professional army. It is a citizen militia essentially. But Rome is almost constantly at war, and
Now, real fast, my army. I heard at this point to even join the army, you had to be like a landowner or something. So even these plebeians like weren't poor people. They were semi poor, but not that poor.
yeah, plebeians does not equate to poor. It just means that your ancestors weren't part of the original Senate that was appointed by Romulus. So yeah, you could be moderately rich. Later on, you do get plebeians who are as rich as patricians, and the distinction doesn't really mean anything.
And that's you probably talk about it later. That's why the that revolt happened.
What revolt?
Well, I don't know if there's a revolt, but in history books that I read that the plebeians, uh, go on strike or something, or they did something.
Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about that. It's they aren't nobles yet. The term noble, we'll talk about that later. Patricians are something different. The nobility. We'll talk about that later. um, so the plebeians, you did have to made up the bulk of the army, and while they're on campaign, their farms are left abandoned, and they're forced uh, into abuse and enslavement by the patricians because of this. So the patricians further gain a hold, but because Rome is constantly at war in 494 BCE, the plebeians are sent off to go fight the patricians' war, and they said, "We're not going to do it." In the Secessio Plebis.
And this is still way before Alexander the Great.
Yeah, this is more around the Battle of Marathon. Uh, so the Persians are making their first foray into Greece. Now, it's probable these stories are sort of made up because they surprisingly sound a lot like how Athens moved into a democracy. Uh, Essentially, the people were becoming enslaved to the aristocracy because because of debt, and this forces Athens into a democracy. But we're gonna act as if it is real. Okay. um After this, they were able after this secession, they were able to negotiate a council of plebeians, and were given a new office, the plebeian tribune. The plebeian, pardon.
So tribune. What's that again?
A tribune is just the the plebeian tribune becomes a lot more important later on. It's a magistracy. Uh, it's a magistracy that held a lot of power. Essentially, the tribune of the plebs, as it was also called, they were elected by the plebeian council. They were the spokespeople of the plebeians. They could call meetings of the plebeian council. Um, they also were responsible for organizing support for legislation that was brought to this council uh, after it passed the Senate. And they were sacrosanct and could not be assaulted. So their job is if they see a patrician messing with a plebeian, they would go and get in between them. And if the patrician decided that he wanted to, put up the fists with the plebeian, that could mean you die because if you touch the plebeian in a violent manner, they're sacrosanct. You're gonna die. So their job is to protect the plebeians. They'll gain a lot more power later on, and it becomes a big problem and sort of signals the downfall of the republic. But we'll get there. Even after this, is this a thing that I don't know about?
Mm.
um so at this point, Roman law is not written down. It's all spoken word. So patricians were still able to misuse the law because they were the only ones that knew the law, and the plebeians didn't. So the plebeians are like, "Hey, let us. Uh, can we write down the laws so that we can read them and make sure that the patrician isn't abusing us?" So in 449 BCE, the 12 tables are created, and they had to be posted wherever business is being done and stuff like that to ensure that plebeians aren't being abused by patricians.
And 1,000 years later, Justinian fixed all these laws.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the Justinian Code pretty much is all of Roman law for 1,000 years written down into a book. But in 445 BC, the plebeians are like, no, we haven't had enough. We want more. They asked for the right to be allowed to be elected as consul and hold the highest office in the land. The Senate refused. Um, uh, so, but they gave them the consular tribunes, which held a lot of the same powers. However, the Senate could veto who was consular tribune. Essentially, so if you elected a rabble rouser, they could say, no, we don't like him, elect somebody else, to try and ensure that the plebeians weren't causing any more, you know. But as the republic continues and as Rome is now becoming a much larger regional power and starting to expand out of Latium and into Etruria and Campania and places like that, the plebeians still aren't seeing the fruits of their labor. And they're still pissed. But finally, the Senate, in all their gracious, beauty and everything, passes the Lex Licinia Sextia in 367 BCE. This meant that at least one consul had to be a plebeian. So you still have two consuls, but one's going to be the patrician consul and one's going to be the plebeian consul. So now, uh,
Will it be obvious which one is which, or
not really. Essentially, after this point, essentially, the distinction really does not mean anything anymore. Because you get really rich plebeians and you get really rich patricians and really poor patricians as well. Um, because it costs a lot of money to be in politics in Rome. You have to spend exorbitant amounts of money. You have to hold games, stuff like this, and if you ever want to get elected. So it, essentially, Julius Caesar's family is poor patricians at the time of Julius Caesar. Stuff like that. So the distinction stops really meaning anything. You uh, the patricians, of course, in 366 BC created two new offices to try to counteract these reforms that only patricians could hold. But after this point, patricians and plebeians can hold the same power, but you're still gonna have this underclass that won't be very happy about that, and that will come back to bite them a couple centuries down the line.
so well, no, so after this, for at least in name, it went from being a patrician versus the plebeians to being either you're Roman or you're not Roman.
Yes, and Rome has an interesting way of expanding. They mostly don't take over your land. They will found colonies in places. And send Roman citizens there in order to ensure that you're pacified. But you get this status of foederati, um, allies essentially, and you just send armies to Rome all the time if you're a foederati, and that counts on maps usually as Rome controls you because, in all intents and purposes, they do. But uh, you're ruling yourself. You decide your own domestic policy. You just don't decide your foreign policy or what to do with your troops. And that will also come back to bite Rome in the butt later on. All right.
Next page.
Yeah. So during this time, Rome has been expanding. They finally defeat the their sister city, essentially, this Etruscan city called Veii. They're finally able to defeat it after a 10-year siege. And then comes the Gauls.
And they are from the region that would later be known as France, correct?
Not these original
Oh,
Gauls. Um, so the Celts originate from southern Germany, Austria kind of area, Switzerland kind of area. That's the Hallstatt culture. Eventually, as they expand out, you get the Gauls. The Gauls are essentially the Latin and Greek words for the Celts, but other Celts will get different names because they're in different areas. But the Gauls, yes, do eventually get displaced by the Germans to only live in France and in some pockets in modern day Hungary and uh, Anatolia, which is Turkey. But these original Gauls are migrating, and they migrate south of the Alps. There's a couple of tribes, the Boii, the Senones. I don't remember the other ones, but the Senones are important for this story. So as these Gauls moved south into what's called the Po River Valley, if you ever look at a map of Italy in the north, there's this random valley in between the Alps and the Apennines. It's called the Po River Valley. It's where all these big cities like Milan and Venice technically isn't in the valley, but it's that general area. Venice, Milan, stuff like that. They move into this fertile valley. And they start displacing the Etruscans. The Etruscans start losing a lot of their power. Yes. Um, the Republic was never really that stable, sadly. And that's probably why it devolved into an empire, uh, because there was just too much conflict, and the institutions that were set up were always flawed. And the Romans ultimately were a very conservative people. So when people agitated for new things, the Roman elite didn't really like it, so they tried to stamp it down. So Rome just has its final victory against Veii, and they're like, yes, oh, we're big boys now. But then comes this group of Gauls called the Senones, led by a dude named Brennus, who is pictured in this picture. Um, he decides he wants to sack Rome, so he comes down. He absolutely trounces the Romans just north of the city because uh, Gauls were very fierce warriors. They'd pump their chest and be like, yeah, and then they charge at you, and as long as you stayed in a formation, that shock of the charge is not going to be that big. But if one dude gets scared, the whole formation crumbles, and that's what happened. Um, he's able to sack Rome, and this is him sacking Rome. Uh,
And but Rome wouldn't be touched again until the Goths years later.
yeah, this absolutely traumatizes the Romans. A lot of the actions that Julius Caesar later does in what is today France and Belgium, a
Revenge.
lot of it is seen as revenge and makes Julius Caesar really popular. Um, at any time a power any gets anywhere close to Rome, the Romans panic. Um, Stuff like that. This absolutely traumatizes them. Uh, and it's another reason why later on, when Alaric sacks Rome, that's so demoralizing. Because this is the last time Rome will be sacked until the 5th century. So you've
Yeah, even we'll probably get to the next episode, but even Hannibal never got to sack Rome.
nope, he did not get to sack Rome. He just kind of like ran around the Italian peninsula and never goes for Rome. Probably because he couldn't, but yeah. So
So we'll get that next month.
yeah, this kind of spurs Rome to never really accept peace on anyone else's terms ever again. They'll fight to the end because of this. They'll never accept a defeat ever. They will. Um, there are many different times and many different wars in which it looks bad for the Romans during this early period, and the Romans just go, we got more men. We can do it. It's just kind of this Roman characteristic they have.
Well, at this point, they probably only had one or two legions, not like the few more legions they would have later on in the later down the line.
Uh, ye, yeah. Um, it it was more they'd never faced an enemy like the Gauls before, and the Romans were still fighting like hoplites, which formation is very important in that kind of fighting style. And one man gets spooked by the Gauls thumping their chests, being naked, stuff like that. You're gonna one dude runs, the rest of the army runs. So, and you're kind of screwed. But it all goes up from here for Rome.
Can't go down. Can't go down right now.
Yeah, it can't go much
Oh,
further down. So after this, Rome begins expanding into Campania, which is the area around Mount Vesuvius in modern day Naples, just to the south of Latium, which is the area around Rome. This area is extremely fertile. Italy is a bunch of mountains, so if you get a good little coastal plain like this, you're going to have a lot of agriculture that you can't get anywhere else on this peninsula. So, this is a very important region. You've got throughout history, you've got the Greeks there, you've got the Romans there, and you've got the Etruscans there because it's so nice, essentially. There's this other region up to the northeast called Samnium, where a group of people called the Samnites live. They're not one people. They are a confederation of a couple of tribes set up into uh, further little subdivisions that come together sometimes for war and stuff like that. Rome and the Samnites both want to control Campania, and the biggest city in Campania at the time is a city called Capua. The Samnites continually raid the area, and Capua gets tired of it. And Capua asks Rome for help. This possibly didn't happen, by the way. It's possibly just a story to make the Romans seem honorable. Take it with a pinch of salt, like with most of the stuff during this time. Um, Capua comes to the Senate, asks for help, and the Senate says, "Nah, we're not going to help you." So Capua decides to surrender itself to Rome. We're now Romans. Now what are you going to do about it? So Rome is like, shit, now we have to fucking help these guys. God damn it, stupid. Ugh. So now Rome is forced to fight the Samnites. This is the smallest of the three Samnite wars, the first Samnite war, and it possibly didn't even happen, by the way. And it only lasted for 2 years, and it's just the Romans going around burning Samnite stuff, the Samnites going around burning Roman stuff, and it all ends with Rome controlling Capua, and the Samnites going, okay. But the war isn't over. Well, the wars with the Samnites aren't over. Next slide. Now this one's the biggie. This one lasts 22 years. Rome, with its new control over Campania, is like, okay, we're going to send a colony down here so that we can control the area better. But this pisses off a city today called Naples.
I've heard of Naples.
So Naples is our version of Neapolis, which in Greek means new city. At this time, there was a different city there called Paleopolis, which means old city. They're the people that we're going to be talking about today. They get really mad that the Romans set up a colony in Campania, so they go and attack the settlement. Rome, of course, is like, you just killed a bunch of Roman civilians. We don't like that very much. So they decide to go to war with Paleopolis. The Paleopolitans are like, hey, Samnites, can you come help us, please? And the Samnites are like, okay. And suddenly war breaks out. One of the defining moments of this war, which is again a lot of, which is a lot of going back and forth and burning other people's stuff. Uh, the Romans walk into a trap. Samnium is a bunch of mountains with some passes, essentially. So the Samnites are able to lure the Romans into a pass called the Caudine Forks. The Romans go in there, and then the Samnites block off the exits. And suddenly the Romans are like, well, shit, we're surrounded. The Samnite general writes his father, who is also a general, what should I do with these Romans? And his dad tells him, you either you kill them all, and or you let them go. Either way, you're kind of fucked, buddy, because the Romans aren't going to like that very much. But he essentially says, if you kill them all, it'll probably be better. But there is a chance that if you let them go, they'll be nice with you now. So he chooses to be nice with them and lets them go. And that probably would have been fine. But he forces them to pass under the yoke. This is something that you do with slaves and denotes that you are a lesser. So this insults the Romans. And the Romans are supposed to go back to Rome and give a peace deal to the Senate to sign. When they get back to Rome, they say, screw that peace deal. We feel insulted. So they decide to go against the deal and go back and fight the Samnites. And this really comes back to bite the Samnites in the butt, because by 312 BCE, the Samnites are on their last legs.
Yeah, I remember when you made us do that yoke thing. Yeah, screw you too.
Yeah. But the Etruscans don't like this. So the Etruscans decide, we're going to come into the war, extending the war by another 8 years. But eventually, Rome is able to win it. This is known as the Great Samnite War because of how big it was. But Rome eventually wins it, even after the humiliation of the Caudine Forks, and it's probably because no Romans died at the Caudine Forks. You probably should have just killed them all, dude, instead of insulting them. But the Romans, they didn't like that. But this isn't the last time they're gonna fight the Samnites, by the way. Because next slide.
Real fast. Now, at this point, Alexander the Great has passed away, and his empire has been split up between his generals, I believe.
Yeah, the Diadochoi Wars are occurring around 304 BCE.
Yeah.
And the Diadochoi Wars will actually affect the Italian peninsula, but that's for next episode.
Yeah, but real fast, one of the greatest ifs of history is if Alexander had gone west instead of east, and instead of dealing with the Persians, you're like, you know what? Let's go bother this little Roman city over here.
I think he'd uh, learn what Pyrrhus learned a couple decades later.
Okay, so you think that he'd be like he would have got his butt kicked handed to him, and
Yeah, the reason why he was able to conquer Persia so easily is because it's essentially one big empire. So you only have one enemy you have to defeat. With Italy at this time, you might have allies in the Greek cities, but the Greek cities aren't feeling threatened by Rome at this time. And that's the only reason why the Greek cities asked for help from Pyrrhus later on. So there's no reason to go in the first place. And
okay.
you have thousands of little different polities that you'd have to fight. It kind of suck. It'd kind of be like his campaign in India, which, yeah, he won some land, but it didn't go as successfully.
But there is no Greek influence past that river for a reason.
There was actually a Greek kingdom over there, but that's a different. That's yeah. Finally, we have the Third Samnite War, and it started because the Romans founded another colony. uh, so Rome founded a colony at this amazingly named city. Oh, I'm talking about a different people. There is an Indo-Hellenic kingdom that's founded in the Indo-Gangetic plain that not many people really know about. That's kind of cool, and you should learn about. Uh, so they founded this colony called Narnia. Just gonna leave that one there. I wonder if there was a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe. Uh,
Well, I don't know. Well, might be a wardrobe. I don't know. I don't know if they had gone to Africa where the lions are yet.
no. Yeah. I just think. I wonder why. Oh God, I forget his name. But the dude who wrote the Narnia series chose Narnia. It's kind of a weird coincidence. um, the Samnites were kind of mad about this, but they weren't able to fight back without help, and they tried to get help from their neighbors, the Lucanians. But the Lucanians said, "Nah." Yeah, that's right, Schmitty. That's right. Um, so the Samnites invade the Lucanians, and the Lucanians asked the Romans for assistance. And the Romans are like, "Okay, we'll do it." The Samnites aren't big fans of our city over here anyway, so we'll protect it preemptively. And this begins the Third Samnite War. It's a weird thing with Rome that they have three different wars with the same people. Like you've got three Samnite wars, three Punic wars, three Macedonian wars. What the hell, Rome? uh, so it becomes a big giant Etruscan Gaulish Samnite. Yes, they do. Samnite coalition in this war. Um, and the decisive battle occurs in 295 BCE. Rome, because of their Rome sent an army into Etruria, forcing the Etruscans away and making it only the Gauls and Samnites at this battle. There was an omen before the battle that one of the consuls, the one on the left of the Roman line, Publius Decius, would have to sacrifice himself in order to win the battle. So during the battle, all seemed lost as the Gauls were smashing through the Roman left wing. But Decius charges into the Gallic line, asking for, essentially rallying his troops behind him. And from there, the Romans won the Battle of Sentinum. And Decius dies in that charge,
Wow.
as was foretold in the things. He died for Rome. That's what he did. Yeah, a lot of heroism. The Romans like that. That probably didn't happen. Like, yeah, he did chart, but the omen probably didn't happen. I hope I don't have to. Yeah. While the war continued, of course, the Gauls and the Samnites were smashed, and you only have to deal with the Etruscans. And yeah, you continue fighting the war in the 290 BCE, but essentially, Rome's won the war, and with winning the Third Samnite War, they've crushed the Gauls, they've crushed the Samnites, and they've crushed the Etruscans, the three greatest powers other than Rome in Italy. And now Rome is the master of Italy, and we
The whole
start
boot is
seeing.
the whole boot is theirs now.
No, they still have to move into the south of the boot, but that will bring them into conflict with other Mediterranean powers, which is why that's going to be in a different video. Because no longer is Rome fighting Italians. Rome is now going to fight foreigners. First with a dude named Pyrrhus, by the way, who is, I think, the nephew of Alexander the Great, something like that. So this is the nobility I was talking about. During this period, the patrician monopoly is obviously gone, and plebeians are able to gain more and more wealth through their victories. A lot of wanting to become consul is you want to gain a lot of wealth through the campaigns you're going to fight, and you're trying to gain glory to enhance your family, the gentes. And during this period, the remaining patrician gentes or families and 20 plebeian ones formed a new elite called the Nobilitas. And this is why you don't have any more conflict between plebeian and patrician. As we go into the fall of the Republic, you are going to have patrician and plebeian nobility ganging up together against the poor farmer and the poor city living person.
Yeah, I guess I probably get it later, but I remember watching history videos. It's while the soldier is at war, the other people are like, "It's a nice land. I'll take this. I'll take this land now while you're fighting, and use our newly caught slaves to farm it for me."
Yeah, but that's something that happens after the Punic Wars, because at this point, you're not gaining too many slaves from fighting. In
All right, so that's more of a part 4 episode.
yeah, that's kind of the breakdown of the Republic as Rome becomes. I'm not talking about a polity ruled by an emperor. I'm talking about an empire, as in like it rules over multiple different areas. Um, you're not going to get uh, it. The wealthy get wealthier and the poor get poorer, essentially. And some dudes try to fix that, and the rich dudes don't like it. but we'll get into that.
Yeah, that's more of a part 4 thing.
So, next slide, because we're going to talk about the military.
Our season finale, our finale.
The military reforms. As I talked about earlier, the Romans for most of this period were fighting as hoplites. Hoplites, citizen soldiers, they carry a helmet, they carry a shield, they carry a long spear, as you can see in this left picture, and they fight in a phalanx. Essentially, everybody's shield covers the next guy. If one dude runs, the whole formation will run. If the flanks get hit, you can't turn very well, so you're screwed there too. And this causes them a lot of problems in their campaigns in Samnium because Samnium is very hilly. It's not a plain like Latium is, and it's not a plain like Campania is. So they start changing up the way in which they fight into a more fluid formation that they probably actually got from the Samnites. And a lot of the new gear they're going to use is also probably from the Samnites. And this is one of the things that Rome is really good at. They're good at fighting somebody and then going, huh, I like the way they fight. I'm going to start using that. Um, the the new Roman soldier will fight in what is called the Manipular Legion. This is your earliest legion, essentially. They fight in what?
So how is the Roman army divided up, like legions and Taurians and all that stuff?
You don't get specific legion numbers at this time. Legion is just the word for an army, and you raise up an army, and that gets called a legion. Later on, when the Roman army gets professionalized, you'll get different numbered legions because they're professional soldiers at that point. But at this point, they're still citizen soldiers. They're just trained to fight in this way.
They're fighting to defend their city's honor.
Yeah. So in this new
Fast question: are these people, all these soldiers right here, are they still only from the city of Rome at this point?
So you'd have your Roman legions, and then you'd have your auxiliaries, which are from allied cities. Later on, you'd actually have Samnites fighting in their own legions that are sent to Rome to fight with Romans in the Punic Wars and against Pyrrhus and stuff like that. So you've got your Roman legions where the Romans are, and you have allied forces, and we'll talk about it later on, but this is their big advantage against the Carthaginians is they have this massive pool of men to recruit from their allied cities and tribes and stuff, who send their own legions to the Romans, who fight in a very similar way, which will come back to bite the Romans in the butt, by the way, but we'll talk about that later.
It's probably a part 5 or part 6 thing.
Yeah. So this new legion fought in 4 lines based on age, wealth, and equipment. Your first line, I'm going to have to explain some war terminology first. You've got infantry, which are your fighting men, the dudes on the ground, foot soldiers. Skirmishers are lightly armored and lightly equipped, either with a spear. Not a spear, a javelin, a bow, or a sling. The Roman skirmishers usually had javelins. They'd fight in a loose formation. They'd go harass the enemy a little bit before the battle really begins, and then once the battle starts, they go back behind the line and don't participate anymore. So your first line are velites, really young people or very poor people that are brought up into the army, lightly equipped with javelins that are going to try to pelt the enemy army with javelins. The first line is the youngest line, the hastati. The hastati and principes are essentially they're equipped in the same way. It just depends on age. The hastati have a large rectangular shield that does not interlock like in a phalanx because they need room for their sword. Because the Romans are now going to start using swords instead of spears, because it's more effective. It's more effective in the type of fighting that they're doing now. So you've got a big rectangular shield with a giant boss in the middle of it that you're going to bash your enemies with every once in a while. Try to stun them so that you can stab them. You have two javelins.
So they're starting to come out of phalanx formations into this new system.
Yes, these are much more mobile, and at this time they would elect somebody who would lead these maniples. So you actually have these maniples are really fluid. They can move on their own. You don't necessarily need the army commander to control them at all times, which is very effective against Greek armies, especially. Um, so they have two javelins that they'll throw at the enemy before they charge at them, and they have a short sword. It's not the gladius yet because they get the gladius from Iberians, but it's a short sword that they uh, adopt from the Samnites, and the shield they adopt is also from the Samnites. So then they'll close in with the enemy. They'll fight with the short sword and with the shield. The line right behind them, they're more grizzled, but they're not. They're not the old guys yet. They're middle aged. They've survived a couple battles. Once the Hastates charge is a little bit broken, they'll be sent in with, and they're equipped exactly the same as the Hastati. Behind them, and these guys are rarely used in battle, but if they are, that means the battle went down to the wire. A it almost was a loss, but they're gonna win it. These are the Triarii. They're equipped a lot more like the old hoplites. They have a spear, and they've been fighting for a long time. They've survived all the wars. They're old.
Mm.
Yes.
I was just saying. I was saying.
Oh, these are your Mitch McConnells and your Joe Bidens. No, they're a little younger than that. These are your grandpas. But they're really good at fighting, and they're only ever used if the battle is going poorly. And then, of course, you've got horsemen on the sides that will come in from the side to try to flank enemies, fight off enemy cavalry, harass the enemy, stuff like that. And they adopt this because it's a lot easier to fight in the mountains with these. And they're still mostly fighting the Samnite Wars with phalanxes. However, by 300 BCE, it's mostly this new manipular formation.
Okay.
And that's it.
Awesome.
That's all, folks.
All right. So I'm guessing next month we'll be touching the Punic Wars, ending with Rome burning down and salting Carthage to dust.
They probably didn't salt it, but yes. I'm always skeptical of ancient writers talking about salting cities because it doesn't really work.
What does that mean, anyways?
The idea is that you put salt in the soil so that nothing can grow.
Yeah, well, obviously they rebuilt Carthage later because that's what the Vandals took over.
Yeah, it becomes the main settlement for Rome in Africa and a big exporter of grain to Italy. Because
And
yeah,
and that's who my city is named after, the Vandals.
oh yeah, uh, yeah. But yeah, now Rome is going to start fighting Mediterranean powers, and the first one they're going to fight is not Carthage. It's going to be some dude in Greece that's going, what? He's actually asked because Rome doesn't control southern Italy, but when Rome tries to go into southern Italy, controlled
Because
by
those are Greek,
which is
because those are
yeah,
Greek colonies.
yeah, they're like, hey, Pyrrhus, can you come help us? And Pyrrhus is like, oh yeah, dude, I really want an empire. Come on, I want to be like my uncle or cousin. I don't remember how he's related to Alexander, but he's related to Alexander. I want to be like him.
Uh, well, and that will be at the end of September, give or take. But next week, me and Jillian will be talking about the American Declaration of Independence,
Cool.
which will wrap up a trilogy of Declaration, Constitution, and amendments. But until then, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We will see you all next time. Bye.